Welcome back to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be talking about Faruzan. We've made our way through a few of the different characters in the character archive, and we've made our way now all the way down over to Faruzan. Before we start talking about the actual talents themselves and looking at them, the idea behind Faruzan is to basically be buffing your Anemo DPS characters like Zhao, Wanderer, and even Hazo, if I can find him, he's over here. So characters like that, your Anemo DPS characters, if you've built them, she's going to be really the character you're going to really want to be buffing with. Usually you're not using her with any other type of means. You can, but normally just because of how she plays and what she does in her kit, which we'll get into, you're not really going to be running her anything besides just buffing your Anemo DPS characters, or even a character like Venti, who although he does off-field damage, you could technically use her to buff him as well. Looking in terms of leveling priority between the different talents, really the only thing that you really have to level into, in my personal opinion, is her burst. The other two don't really need anything. Her normal attacks don't help at all. Her skills are just straight up more damage. They will help you get some extra pressurized collapse, which once again, that's some extra stuff we'll talk about later, but it's just more personal damage. There's nothing here that's going to be extremely useful for you. Even if you get into the C6 and talking about the usefulness of that C6 with something like 4-piece tenacity, which once again we'll get into later, there's no point in really leveling the skill technically besides more damage. So the only thing you really need to level into is the burst. Now, looking at the burst, because like I said, the skill, if you want to look into the skill, it's basically you just press the skill, it puts you in the manifest gale state, and then you're going to have these like 2 extra arrows that you can do. So I'll just use my skill right here. You can see these 2 little like arrow type things you can do here. As soon as I get a charge, you can see I start to get this. And then it does like a pressurized collapse upon the charge attack, and I'll do it again and it does that. So you get 2 of those charges. Now if I was just doing a regular charge attack here, you can already see the little bit of the difference between the actual, like there's no triangle, there's no kind of thing here to really look at and be different. And if I take the shot, it just does a regular shot. Whereas if I do the charge attack here, you can see kind of the like triangle just kind of move around and spin around a little bit, just so you know. And then if I just shoot that, it does a little pressurized collapse. Now, looking at the skill, and it's a little bit more of its usefulness specifically. Basically, like I already said, it's going to do the Anemo just basically damage, and then it's going to do some sort of pressurized collapse, which is down here. The hurricane arrow, which is those enhanced ones, you'll get 2 of those that I already kind of showed you. They'll have that small vortex that'll pull opponents nearby. If the hurricane arrow does not hit any opponents, it'll create a pressurized collapse upon the effect on impact, and it's still considered elemental skill damage. So even though you did a charge attack, it's still based off of this. So if you want to level into it to just get those extra little bits of damage while you do these, then sure, you can. That's why I've leveled them. It's just to get the extra little bit of damage while I do this. It's really good for energy, as well as just helpful upon bringing enemies closer together, especially when characters like Zhao or whatever kind of move them. So having characters like that can kind of, she still has some good ability to kind of do that. So I do think that this is kind of useful for her as a character to do. Now, looking at her burst though, this is once again the major area that you're going to want to focus in. As you can see, I already have it crowned as well. Basically, she states here she's going to just do a dazzling polyhedron, which is basically just a huge AoE damage hits. She's going to have what's called the Whirlwind Pulse, then go up. Now, the thing with the Whirlwind Pulse, it's basically like a polyhedron that's just going to kind of go in like a triangle direction. When you look at Whirlwind Pulse, it states that it will apply Perfidious Wind's Bale to nearby opponents, decreasing their animal resistance, which obviously if you look here, it's 30% as you increase whatever. And then with the Whirlwind Pulse, will also apply Powerful Wind's Benefit to all nearby party members when it is unleashed, granting them an animal damage bonus. So even though you can see here that yes, you could technically use her in a Viridescent type build, but honestly, she is going to be kind of, I guess, technically buffing her own damage at that point in time. But honestly, the whole point here is to increase the damage bonus of the characters that you're near, as well as decreasing the animal resistance of enemies that you're near. So helping your own teammates do more damage here, and also bringing the debuff to the enemies. It's just a great kind of idea that you're going for in general. Now, if we kind of look at using her burst, I can show you. Basically, it's going to throw this, and then you can see it moves in kind of like a triangle direction. Then it's going to go over here, and it's going to come back on top. So even if I move, it will keep moving in its own direction. So it'll go back to that other starting point. So it won't follow you around, which means that, just sticking with your characters and then doing damage and whatever in those instances, using your burst and whatnot is probably the way that you're going to be running her. Now, you can already see as well when she was running around, she kind of had that like almost like Anemo kind of like thing following her around. That's just a Powerful Wind's Benefit, which is giving you that Anemo damage bonus that you see here. Now, a little bit more looking at her, kind of more beyond her talents, let's look at her passives. It states that when Faruzan is in the manifest scale state, which is when you use the skill, the amount of time taken to charge a shot is decreased by 60%, which is going to be very helpful for getting energy back, as well as putting out those specific just charge shots. to get the energy back quicker, as well as just make sure that she's not on field as much, because she's really just going into energy recharge, really, and maybe some just base attack and whatnot whenever you can get it. So you're not really going anything goated specifically for Faruzan, so she's not like a tank or anything like that. So keeping her on field as short of a time as possible, as well as since she's a bow character can get knocked out of that charge shot state, you kind of want to make sure that her decreasing of time is going to be good here, so that's a good passive talent to have. Also, she can apply the Wind Secret Ways Perfidious Wind's Bale to opponents who are hit by the vortex created by pressurized collapse. What it's basically talking about here is the Peripheral Wind's Benefit, and that other idea here, that's what this is. That's the other idea, the Anemo damage bonus. That's when it's going to your own character. But what this is talking about, when you use a skill and you hit the opponent with this specific skill, right, and you do this hit with the enhanced kind of like charge shots from the skill, it's going to, and you hit an enemy with it, it's going to apply the Perfidious Wind's Bale. If your burst isn't even up in time and you can't really get this extra buff, the extra Anemo damage bonus buff, as well as the Anemo resistance buff, if you don't have your burst ready, technically you can just go ahead and use your enhanced skill. Just use your skill and then just do a charge shot on the enemy that has this, and technically they'll still have the Anemo resistance decrease as well. So technically your characters will still get a buff by doing this, even if your burst isn't ready. Looking at her second passive talent, states that when characters affected by the Wind Secret Ways Peripheral Wind's Benefit, which is the increased Anemo damage bonus, when they deal damage using normal, charged, plunging attacks, elemental skills, or elemental bursts to opponents, they will gain the Hurricane Guard effect. This damage will be increased, basically, so they're going to get the Hurricane Guard effect, which will then give them a damage buff based on 32% of Faruzan's attack. So honestly, a very good thing. That's honestly a base attack, by the way. So that's why having like high base attack weapons. So even if you wanted to use something like Amos's bow, comparatively to Fav, technically, even if you have, a level 90 bow, this is still going to be, worse off than a 5-star weapon bow, obviously. So going for a high base attack weapon is actually not really that much of a problem and that really bad of an idea. Making sure you have a high base attack is going to be very helpful for you. Now, this doesn't necessarily stack, by the way, so you can't like stack this 30% that you can get from the skill as well as the burst and get another 30%. It's still just the 30% no matter what. But it is very nice to have, especially like I said once before, and I've kind of beaten it to death. You don't have your burst ready. It is very helpful to have. So let's go ahead and talk about weapons as we were just there. Now, personally, my favorite weapon for her is going to be Favonius Warbow. It's got a good amount of base attack for a 4-star, and we already saw, obviously, in that second passive talent, that it is going to be good, so having that is going to be nice. But honestly, the main stat of energy recharge is going to be even almost better for her. You want to have a very high energy recharge when you're looking at a character like Faruzan, and that's mainly just because you're, once again, as I've talked about, you're trying to get your burst back so consistently over and over again. So making sure you have a very high energy recharge. Now, I probably have gone, extremely high to the point that I don't even need that much. But honestly, with this character, you don't really have much else you're really going into. If you want, you can go into crit rate, especially if you're running Favonius, getting some extra crit rate as well. But honestly, crit rate and energy are going to be really the only things you're really going for on the character, especially if you're running Favonius Warbow. So keeping that in mind, there are just a few other weapons that I think you could use. But if someone was going to walk up to me and say, I want to use this specific character, Faruzan, how should I build her? My first opinion would be to go right for Favonius Warbow. Now, second to that is a weapon called Elegy for the End. I know this is a 5-star weapon, and technically, 5-star weapons are better, and it is nice because it does have a higher base attack at 608, whereas a level 90 Favonius Warbow is going to have something around the lines of like 454 base attack. So keeping that in mind, you are kind of getting about 61% energy recharge at level 90 with this specific bow, this 4-star bow right here. But if you go for the level 90 of Elegy for the End, you're getting 55.1% energy recharge. So you lose the energy recharge, but you get more base attack. So it really depends on which way you want to go, which is why I liked more energy recharge, which is why I go for Favonius Warbow, as well as I don't have Elegy for the End anyways. But I do think this weapon isn't as good anyways, because the ability, it's helpful, but not necessarily great. Basically, the ability on the weapon just states that it increases elemental mastery of the character by 60, and then when elemental skills or bursts of the character wielding this weapon hit opponents, the character gains a sigil of remembrance, kind of basically similar to what Kazuha's weapon does, because they're all on part of the same type of weapon. When you possess 4 sigils of remembrance, all of them will be consumed, and all nearby party members will obtain the millennial movement for 12 seconds. At this point in time, then they'll get an extra increased elemental mastery as well as attack. So it is a nice type of buff, but in my personal opinion, I really don't feel like it's that great of a weapon, to the point that it just overdoes Favonius Warbow. Another weapon that you could use though is End of the Line. Now this weapon is a very nice weapon because it also is an energy recharge weapon. It doesn't have as much energy recharge as Favonius Warbow, which is why I put it in like third place, but it does, it is a little bit of helpful as well. You can get the Flow Rider effect after using an elemental skill, which, you can be using every once in a while with Faruzan, and you'll deal 80% of your attack as AoE damage upon hitting the opponent, so that's kind of nice, and there's some extra instances and whatnot that you can get out of it. I do think it's a good weapon, especially, honestly, you're just mainly focusing on the energy recharge for the weapon. And obviously, talking about, energy recharge weapons, you could talk about Fading Twilight. Normally, I would keep this, specific weapon on Yelan or Fischl because it works a little bit better on them, in my personal opinion. But, it's just kind of helping personal damage. So I don't really feel like, it's going to be necessarily too great for you. I think this weapon's more personal. So once again, not really that great. Doesn't have as high energy recharge as well, so which is why it's also a little bit further down. And then technically you could run something like Sacrificial if you don't have this weapon either. If you don't have the Favonius Warbow or even End of the Line or something like that, you can go for Sacrificial. I'm not a big fan of it. The ability is kind of useless for Faruzan because you don't really need to be consistently using your skill over and over again. So I really don't feel like it's that, really that necessary, but it does have an energy recharge main stat. So if you want to use this as well, as you can see here, all the weapons I'm telling you to use are energy recharge. There's really no other weapon that I would say to consistently use to go for anything else like Elemental Mastery or Crit Rate or something like that. Looking beyond these specific weapons though, let's go ahead and talk about artifacts. Now, this depends on whether or not you're at C0 or up to C5 or you're at C6. So C0 to C5, you're going to run probably the 4-piece set of like Emblem. Now, the reason why you're going to be running Emblem, the 2-piece gives you the energy recharge, and the 4-piece is going to increase your personal damage, which she's using consistently based off her energy recharge. You're already going so heavily into energy recharge, you might as well go a little bit further, and you can get some personal damage from the weapon. If you are C0 to C5 as well, you could also use something like Noblesse. Obviously, once again, a little bit more personal damage in the 2-piece, but the 4-piece is going to increase all party members' attack by 20%. Just keep in mind that if you are using someone like Bennett or somebody else like on the team that already is using a 4-piece Noblesse, you can't stack this. Obviously, it says here that this effect cannot stack, so using it with somebody else that actually uses this specific set, obviously like Bennett, like I've talked about before, Bennett and Faruzan can't really do too much together, especially if they're running the same Noblesse set, which is why I think so many people go off of the 4-piece Emblem, because the extra energy recharge, and you get some personal damage as well, and you can kind of use that with other characters that use the 4-piece Noblesse set. The other thing that I do want to keep in mind, though, is if you are C6 and you do have a C6 Faruzan, you're like, look, at this point, I wasn't really going to build her, but now that I have her at C6, I might as well. You're going to want to run a 4-piece Tenacity. Now, the reason why is because, no, you don't really care about the 2-piece. It's really all about the 4-piece. And you're like, well, why would the 4-piece matter? It says that, an elemental skill hits an opponent, the attack is, increased, and it's only for 3 seconds. And if she's really burst heavy and, kind of focusing on using her burst consistently, and you've already talked about not using Sacrificial, why would I want to use my burst? And the reason why is because the C6 kind of changes that. Now, we'll talk about the other constellations in a minute as well. The C6 states that characters affected by the Wind Secret Ways Peripheral Winds benefit have 40% increased crit damage when they deal Anemo damage. While the character, now this is where it really comes into effect, when the active character deals damage while affected by Peripheral Winds benefit, they will apply Pressurized Collapsed to the opponent damaged. And this effect can be triggered once every 3 seconds. So if you kind of keep that in mind, the idea here is that the active character deals damage while affected by the Peripheral Winds benefit, which is when you use your burst. So as soon as you pop your burst, not only are you getting 40% increased crit damage when you deal Anemo damage, but they will apply the Pressurized Collapsed to the opponent that they damage, that they hit. Now, the Pressurized Collapse is going to be tied to the skill, which is why this is going to be triggering technically a skill hit. As you can see here, this vortex damage, everything here is going to be considered a skill, technical, elemental skill damage hit, which means that technically the 4-piece Tenacity, where it says elemental skill hits when they hit opponents, the attack is increased. Technically, when you do your burst and then deal damage with your characters, so the Anemo damage specifically, you're actually triggering Pressurized Collapse, which is an elemental skill hit, which means you're getting this buff consistently over time. And that has a 3-second trigger consistently, or a cooldown, and this here as well gives you a buff for 3 seconds as well. So the timings perfectly match each other, so you get a 3-second buff, you have this other thing that goes on for 3 seconds, and then as soon as you do it again, this basically can restart as well. So both of them work extremely good together, that's why. And probably I almost kind of talked too much about it, but that's the idea. If you have C6, use 4-piece tenacity, it will work, and you are going to get that consistent attack buff. Now, speaking of the other constellations, now let's kind of backtrack our way and talk about the C1 to the C5. The first constellation states that Faruzan can fire off a maximum of 2 hurricane arrows using fully charged aim shots while under the effect of a single manifest scale created by Wind Realm of Nasim Jin, which is basically her skill. That's why when you see my character, obviously here, my Faruzan, normally you'd only get one of these specific like little triangles next to her, but I have 2, which allows me to shoot technically 2 of them at one time, and basically 2 charges every time I use my skill. The second constellation states that the duration of the dazzling polyhedron created by the Wind's secret ways, which is her burst, is increased by 6 seconds. So basically you're having that buff almost go on for longer. So honestly, the C2 is an extremely good constellation that you should try to go for, as well as obviously the C6 as well. But honestly, the C2 is extremely good to try to jump after. The C3 increases the level of the skill by 3, and the C5 increases the level of the burst by 3. The C4 states that the vortex created by the pressurized collapses in the skill on those charge attacks will restore energy to Faruzan based on the number of opponents hit. If it hits one opponent, it will restore 2 energy to Faruzan. Here it states that no matter what, if it hits an opponent or one specific opponent, Faruzan will restore 2 energy. It also states that each additional opponent hit will restore 0.5 energy more to Faruzan as well. Technically you could be getting up to 6 energy every time you do that for your Faruzan to make sure she's getting back her burst. Now, the thing with her burst I do want to keep in mind, looking at her specific skill attributes, the reason why you want such a high energy recharge is because she has an energy cost of 80. Obviously talking about that, I've already talked about why you need it so much, but honestly, the skill cost is the biggest problem as to why you need so much energy in the first place. So keeping that in mind and talking about Faruzan in general, I'm going to be showing you guys kind of the idea between the different usages of Faruzan. I'm going to be using her with a Zhao team, as you can see here. I'll be using her with a Wanderer team as well with a Hazo team, just for the people who want to see a 4-star. I will use a team with Faruzan and without Faruzan for each team that I do with her, just to show you how much she's going to be kind of bringing to the team when you kind of lose her and kind of put somebody else in her place, just to show you how much Faruzan is very useful to the characters. Now keep in mind I do have her at C6, and the C6 is giving me 40% more increased crit damage for the Anemo damage hits, but keep in mind that honestly those buffs are still given at C0 on the Anemo damage bonus, as well as the Anemo resistance decrease to the opponents that are hit. Well, that's everything I've got talking about Faruzan. I hope you guys enjoyed the gameplay, and hopefully that kind of showed you how useful she is for Anemo damage characters. If you guys did like the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.